Today, I would like to talk about the opera La Bohème by Giacomo Puccini. This is a very nice little opera, rather short, but there are many difficulties built in which some people may not realize. I mean, it's enjoyable, true, but let me tell you why it is difficult today. Now, the Bohème here means Bohemian. Bohemian also means Bohemian region, which is part of the Czech Republic now. And there are lots of gypsies living in there. And the gypsies have their own way of life, regardless of how other people behaves. So that originally Bohemian means kind of gypsies, but later this word Bohemian also starts containing the meaning of young, freewheeling, unrestricted by the social norm type of artists in the region. So when used in that sense, it means very strange odd kids do all sorts of weird things kind of life. But they are serious, they are true to their own life, and they try to live honestly, which may contradict with the social norm. So this is a kind of story. And this opera particularly stems from Culture Latin, which is Latin area, very close to the famous university Sorbonne and other universities and institutes, where the Latin language can be used. Kind of intelligent area. So Latin quarters, so they say. Now, Anri was a young man who wanted to become a writer, who was kicked out his house from his father, and he starts living in this sort of Bohemian type life in Latin Quarter. He wanted to become the writer, so that at some point of the time when he was 23 years old, he was writing this very interesting lifestyle of other Bohemians around him in the area. So he wrote up about 5-10 pages of article and sent it to the magazine of the local. And this actually was well received. Because if you think about it, oh my God, I never knew those young people do this. I mean, that's incredible. That sort of response was everywhere. And well received, well known, and so that the author started to write more and submitted for the publication to the same magazine, one after another. And this gradually get the attention. This was around the 1845, 180 years ago. And young playwright, Théodore Barrière, also lived in the vicinity and noticed this article and, wow, this will be interesting. Maybe we can make the play on stage out of this. So he went to talk to the author, Anri Mouget, and let's write a play together. So it's co-authored. Wrote a 5-act play and then performed in the area. And this had the great reception. So now Anri Mouget himself realized, gee, I'm doing right. And since I wrote quite a few of those, why don't we just publish it as a book? So that this Life of Bohemians was published 1851. And this actually is a book. I have the original French version as well as this one, this English version. And it says Life of Bohemians. And contain wildlife in the way we look at it. Gee, wow, young people are like that. But if you look 120, 140 years later, when I looked around the young people when I was in Chicago, oh, they are wild too. And was more accepted in a way because it's a gradual change of the society. And so I recognized that lifestyle does change. At some point, this is a strict normal for the people, may not stay exactly the same for tens and hundreds of years. And so this sort of get me interested. Because about 60 years ago, maybe 58 years ago, I was given an opportunity to study a conducting of Johann Sebastian Bach music by the real-world authority, Kurt Thomas, who was a successor of the same position as Johann Sebastian Bach in the same church. And it was a very interesting lecture and practice session, but I realized he was telling me very important story because he was producing Johann Sebastian Bach music some hundreds of years later. So he commented about it, and look that world is not staying identical to hundreds of years later. Today's audience lives with automobile, telephone, computer, or airplane, and the rhythm of life, way of thinking are already very much different. So he mentions that there are two ways to produce or perform Johann Sebastian Bach music. One way is try to produce exactly the same way as it was produced when Johann Sebastian Bach was alive hundreds of years ago, using the old music instruments and somewhat the way it was supposed to be hundreds of years ago. And he says, this is one way of doing it, which is fine, except I myself, Professor Kurt Thomas himself, thinks that the performers of the music have a work to do to present the great sensation, excitement of the composer-produced music. Not the rhythm music. It's what the composer wanted to tell people, feel people, enjoy. So it is the result which he cares. So when that general audience have different feelings, you have to think that there must be some other way to do it. But how? This is a very difficult question. But his philosophy appeals to me because if the audience changed, if you say the same thing, it doesn't work. So this gave me interest into this opera La Bohème story, because that the young generation behavior pattern changed quite a bit. And so you have to think, then if that is the case, how do we produce La Bohème? After all, the title of the opera is Bohemians, wild people, liberated people. So what's written in the score is the starting point. You have to go into kind of thoughts. How can I or can we provide the excitement which would have been some 120 years ago when the music was written? So this is my talk about it. Now, going back to the book, I can find very wild life stories of the Bohemians in the 20s around. But I can see they are just uncontrollable young people, but they are trying to live their honest life seriously, honest to their mind. And that should be recognized. So let's get into the music. The music is beautiful because the Puccini writes such a beautiful music so that not only the audience would enjoy it, but the singers also can really enjoy it, the Puccini's music. It is a delight, physically a delight. Now, Puccini actually wrote in some other places that Puccini himself lived a very poor student life in Milano University, music university, and he went through a wild life himself. Actually, he get mentally involved with the wife of his friend, and eventually they start living together. They've got a baby, but her husband never allowed a divorce, so that they stayed together for 20 years until they legally get married. So, well, Puccini was also a Bohemian, and he also says to the libretto writers who prepare the libretto for the opera that I can tell you my life was such and such. I didn't even have a heat, nothing to burn in the fireplace, and I burned what I wrote, just like in the opera. So this one is a kind of memoir to Puccini's life for him as well. So all those things are talked about, the opera was produced. And so let me go into the opera music. The Act 1 starts with the attic room where the painter Marcello and poet Rodolfo and others live in a small apartment. And the story starts from their merrymaking and all those. But they don't have any heat at all during the winter time. This one is Christmas Eve. And because that the painter, Marcello's finger is numb because it's so cold, he could not even paint well. So he was sort of warming up his hand by his breast and try to continue painting. This is a situation in the Act 1. In that scene, suddenly one of the member, musician, Chonard, come in, hey, come on guys, I've got the money. He tells very, very strange reason how he got the money, but not illegally. And they were penniless, but because Shenard brought the money and the food and all sorts of things and even the wood to burn in the fireplace, suddenly life is changing. So they decided, okay, we haven't eaten anything for a long time, so let's go for a Christmas dinner or Christmas Eve dinner together. So that all the members wants to go out to the famous cafe Momiu. Actually, here's the painting of the cafe Momiu. Existed by then. And so they decided to have some nice food and wine together. But Rodolfo, the poet, had to finish some writing because the due time is coming. So, okay, you go ahead. Let me just finish what I have to write now. I'll join you later. So Rodolfo was left alone, and then suddenly there's a knock on the door. So who is there? And then there's female's voice. And this is Mimi, who was living alone in a very poor condition, making the artificial flowers and all those. She said, my candle was blown out. I have no way to lit the candle. So would you please give me a help to light up this candle? So those two people starts conversation. At the beginning, rather awkward. And but the Rodolfo, being a poet, starts getting interesting in this lady. And they are living in the attic, right under the roof. And the light comes in, a beautiful moonlight shone on this Mimi. And Rodolfo was so impressed. My God, this is so beautiful, girl. I have dreamed of. So here's the beautiful aria Rodolfo sings to Mimi, which is O soave fanciulla. Itself is a beautiful one, but it is interesting that Rodolfo was trying to attract Mimi, trying to appeal to Mimi and sort of flirting to Mimi. And Mimi at the beginning awkward and sort of hesitant, but gradually she was getting interested into Rodolfo because he's seriously falling in love with her. And Rodolfo kisses Mimi, and oh, no, but she is now sort of feeling a closeness to him. And Mimi was telling Rodolfo, look, your friends are waiting on the road. Don't you have to go? And Rodolfo, oh, we don't have to. Outside is cold. Why don't you stay with me here? But he says, I will stay very close to you, so it's not cold for me. Let's go. Well, that's not what Rodolfo had in mind. But then Rodolfo said, okay, well, we may go together for a dinner. But how about when we come back? Then Mimi says, well, curious. Implies, well, there could be a surprise for you. So Rodolfo realized, okay, she cares about me. She may love me. So that the duet goes very nicely. And when after curious answer came from Mimi, this lovely music starts. Up until then, they are Bohemians and wild and honest and straightforward. But this is different. give me a hand. So Rodolfo suddenly realized Mimi can be with him, and he has to treat her like a lady with respect. So the first quarter note here is for the Rodolfo to look at Mimi's eyes to see if she is serious. And then, may I have your arm, please? Just like suddenly he becomes a gentleman. Now Mimi right away respond, I'll follow you, my master. Then she holds his hand and they walk out to the cafe together. But this music is a sudden change. They become out of the Bohemian, the respectable gentleman lady, and it is really a moving scene for me. Puccini can do this marvelous one. So I like it very much. Now they go into the Café Momu, and they dine together. There's the big merrymaking together, which is Act 2. Let me put the Act 2 sideways just for the moment, because I want to talk about something else right now. Now, Act 3, after Mimi and Rodolfo lived together for almost a year, and after the Musetta lived together with Marcello for almost the same time, it's a cold winter morning, and the places where the painter Marcello and Musetta lives together. In the cold winter on the snow, Mimi comes into the scene and see, may I see Marcello? Marcello comes out. Marcello was certainly surprised. Mimi, why are you here? And then Mimi says, well, I have to ask you a help. For some reason I don't understand, Rodolfo now want to get rid of me. He wants me out. But I don't want to do that. I want to be close to Rodolfo. What shall I do? Mimi was at lost. But Marcello wouldn't know the answer for it. But actually, the night before Mimi's love, Rodolfo actually get out of the apartment, came to Marcello's place and stayed overnight. So that Rodolfo coming out of the room and the Mimi suddenly recognized this and hide behind the tree. Rodolfo tells Marcello, well, sorry for the last night. You know that Mimi is dying. She is in the tuberculosis, in a serious condition. If Mimi lives together with me under the total poverty with no heat, the situation would kill her life. So I have to get her going to something more comfortable with a heat and food place. Mimi overheard this, and suddenly she realized how serious her illness is. And then she thinks about it and come out from behind the tree. Rodolfo, oh, Mimi, you are here. Then Mimi starts singing to Rodolfo, okay, I understand the situation. Let's living separately now until springtime when we have warm weather. Now Rodolfo was suddenly changed, was at loss, but that's what he planned to do. So they sing the duet of separating in the Act 3. with lots of lament and good memories together, and everything comes in the music. But that's how it goes. But the beginning of the Act 3 is quite astonishing, because the second act was very merry, cafe scene with Christmas Eve and everything. But Act 3 starts with this two-sharp sound. Ta-dang! Dun, 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 ta, ta, dun. And this one, in my own opinion, is very, very similar to the way like a Japanese stage art does, like kabuki. When the whole thing was totally changed from previous scene, they usually use the wood clapper. And this sound make the audience to realize, okay, totally different things happens. Now we are in a different world. And it is interesting that Puccini does this, and also he uses the lower note tremolo. This one is also very similar to the snow season in Japanese kabuki, used a little drum quietly beaten, which shows soundless snowfall. I thought this is interesting that this is going on. Of course, that the Puccini, I don't think, had any chance of watching the kabuki play. It is that the Puccini also wanted to have the sound to indicate to the audience that suddenly whole thing is changed from a merrymaking to a different world. I thought it's interesting. Anyway, and so the Act 3 goes in this way, sad separation, and then goes into the Act 4. But before I do that, I have to go back to the Act 2, the merrymaking at the cafe. Here, as I keep saying, that in La Bohème presentation on stage, you have to send a message that we are talking about those Bohemians who doesn't follow the social norm. They live their honest life to their mind and disrespect the social agreements. And the Act 2 is the only place you can really show off how gayasly and alive and active that Bohemians are. I don't have to go into the detail. You can see it in the opera production. But here, Musetta, who was a former girlfriend of Marcello, get rid of Marcello because of better money, rich person, rich old man. So they are separated for a while. And Musetta and her sugar daddy, Arcindoro, came into the scene when there was a merrymaking of the Bohemians. And as soon as Musetta see Marcello there, her former lover, oh boy, she had such a great life together with Marcello. And she doesn't care about much for this old, dirty man. So she, in front of her patron, she starts flirting to Marcello. Come on, Marcello, we had a good time together. And very openly approaching, flirting Marcello. And nobody else was surprised because they are Bohemians. Oh, well, Musetta started again. And so you can see that Act 2 is a place where that the Bohemian-like attitude is full open, exposed. So keep it in mind that way. Now, going to the Act 3, Act 4, the last scene, it naturally is the conclusion of the opera. And Mimi was found on the road very ill by Musetta, and Musetta managed to get Mimi back to the old apartment of Rodolfo's because Mimi wanted to see Rodolfo before she dies. So Mimi comes back together, and all those Bohemians are in the same room. They are really concerned about the Mimi's illness, and everybody try to do what they can do. Musetta wanted to sell something she has to get some money for the medicine and all those. Everybody is really concerned about Mimi's life. In it is the philosopher Colleen. Only the thing which he can get some money out of is his old coat that protected him from the freezing winter. But he decided, okay, I'm going to sell this coat to get some money for Mimi. But then he make a big scene out of this, saying, my old coat, you protected my life, and I'm so thankful about you, and now I have to separate from you. Very much of a lament, some nearly 1 minute of lamenting of coat, which is used and torn and very old. But of course, you can understand if the young people lives in a very poor condition, without the coat, they would freeze to death. So this also is an indicator of the Bohemian life, very poor, but try to live honestly. So many people consider this song to the old coat by Colleen is sort of unfitting, because here in front of them, Mimi is dying. Why do you have to make a big racket out of it? But you have to, because he is a Bohemian too. The coat is the protector of his life for many, many years, and now he is willing to sell his coat. So there's only one scene that Bohemian shows how the Bohemian would be like, is this Colleen's aria on the old coat. So this is the only way you can accept this strange intruder into the scene. Anyway, after all those efforts, end comes as expected. Mimi in a serious condition in tuberculosis, and at one point of the time, Musetta, who went close to Mimi, realized that she's dead. And the shock was obvious, and other people recognized that Mimi died right away. And Rodolfo, who really loves Mimi, screams, "Mimi!" And right after that, the final music by orchestra only starts, which is this one. And it says, "Tan, tan, tan, ta 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 tan, 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 ta ta tan, ta 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 tan, ta 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 tan, ta 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 ta, ta ta ta, ta 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 ta." As you can see, this is a funeral march which tells you no one can come back from death. It is so final. And I was listening to the radio performed by conducting Toscanini and recorded 1946. This music really flows my mind. My God, it is so final. It just gives you that set feeling. You cannot go back to anything. And Toscanini's music was so astonishing. I start really respecting his conducting by then. And the music is written that way, largo sostenuto. It should have a dignity and no playing around, because this walk is steady and never backwards. I know some conductor didn't understand this music and plays in a very, very melodramatic way, like Karajan. Tan, 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 la, la, la. I hate this personally. It is an insult to Puccini, personally speaking. But I'm not particularly attacking particular conductor. I'm trying to send a message that famous musicians could do a big mistake, present you the wrong one. So you have to have your own instinct to understand and appreciate the music yourself. So that's my message. Thank you for listening.